On the Tappan Stock Farm around 1913, Natalie Weise's grandfather, Raymond Riley, moved from Attleboro, Mass. With his wife and two daughters, and later two more daughters were born on the farm. Ray ran the farm for the Tappans, where he milked cows and sold the milk to the Drew's Dairy, grew apples in the orchard, and helped to train racehorses with using sulkies. March 5th, 1920, a cow named Bertha was born to a father named Tappans, governor of Winthrop, and a mother named Bree, according to the American Guernsey Cattle Club. In the 1960s-70s, Kathy's father, Graham Tappan, and her uncle Charles Tappan ran the farm and raised chickens for eggs and some animals. So enjoy these two ladies. They've got a lot more to tell you.
So I guess I'm starting, right?
Okay.
So I'm surprised that so many people are interested in the Tappan farm, but it's nice to have everybody here. Since I've retired a few years ago, I've started doing research on my family, and it's been very fun, and I've learned lots, and I still have lots to learn. So one of the things I don't know was the camp, I believe, was built in 1906 or 1908, which this is the camp. But I don't know that for sure.
That's probably right, because it belonged to John McElroy.
The land?
Yeah, who ran the camp belonged to John McElroy, who ran the mill.
The camp did belong to him?
Yeah, one time, yeah.
Oh.
Before the Tappans bought it.
Oh, see, I never knew that. I have to write that down.
Yes, we'll speak to you later.
McElroy. Okay. Well, so they bought the land from I have some old deeds that I was able to find, the whole farm in 1906 and 1908. And that's the map of it over there. And I think if you add up all the pieces, there's about 250 plus acres. There was, not anymore. It's all been, parceled out to different people. But it does have who the land was bought from. And it was my great-grandfather, Charles, that started buying the land and built, having the farm and the camp. And so that's interesting. So when do you think it was built?
It probably would be early 1900s.
Okay.
I'm thinking probably maybe 1903, 1904,
okay.
5.
Okay.
That's when a lot of camps went in.
Okay.
But I think it says, if it doesn't say it on that map, I think it said something about the McElroys on that.
Probably did. Probably. So anyway, I'd like to know more. And so you just told me, thank you. I'd like to start out about telling you a little bit about my family. And I was able to find a handy dandy little book that talks about them. It goes back to 1637. And yes, and I can follow my people all the way back to 1637. And a man named Abraham Tappan, they spelt it with an O, came over on a ship called the Mary Ann. And he came with a wife and 2 kids, and they landed in Newburyport, Massachusetts. And they built houses and things there. And they also, he had more kids. And I'm a descendant of one of the sons, and there were 7 of them. And they all went in different directions. Somebody asked me, the Tappan ranges and appliances, that wasn't the guy I was from. But and some of them are out in Ohio. And so there's not many Tappans left on my line. There's my cousin Bruce and my cousin Charles, which we call Button, and he had a son, Robbie. And I don't know if Robbie had any kids. Bruce didn't. And Charles had Robbie. And so Robbie be the last one on my end of the line. So So anyway, my great-great-grandfather's family settled in Attleboro, Mass. And this is a sales slip from my great-great-grandfather. He owned a horse and carriage kind of shop where you could get your carriages and horses and things. And the slip says 1880, and you had to fill in the number. So I'm surprised that I have that. It's quite old. And so anyway, he had two sons. One was my great-grandfather, Charles, and he had a brother, William. And they went to school in Attleboro and they graduated. Charles went to college and then they both came back and started working. So this was in the 1800s. And they saved up $1,000, which was a lot, I guess, back then. And they started buying up jewelry factories. And the name has changed several times, like from Bates and Bacon and D.F. Briggs, and then it was called the Tappan Brothers. And so it has changed. And they also started buying up land in Attleboro with the buildings on it. And they made jewelry. And do you think I could find it when I was ready to come today? I put it somewhere where I'd remember. So they made the first expansion bracelets. And this is a ring. And this is a little children's bracelet. I don't know if people can see it. And this was the ad for the Carmen bracelet. And we have her in a big frame at camp. And they also made clasp it. They called them clasp its because they spring. And people like them. So let's see. Carmen bracelets. So one of the things about the bracelets, I believe it was during World War I, part of the bracelet, this top would come off and men would buy them for their girlfriends before they went off to war and would put a lock of their hair in there and then seal it up and then give it to their wife or girlfriend or something. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So,
excuse me, I said to Kathy, I said, I've got one of these. I didn't know it came from the Tappans because I guess my grandfather gave his daughter, which is my mother, one of these too. So I thought, I've got one of those.
Yes. So in Attleboro around 1901, my great-grandfather, Charles, built that big house up there. And that house, and this was the garage. And he was married and had a son, Frank, which was my grandfather. And Frank had 3 children, my dad and my aunt and uncle, and they grew up there. And then when my grandfather died, my grandmother gave it to the hospital next door, and they tore it down for a parking lot. Parking lot. So my aunt tried to save it. And she had this, if you want to look at it later, she had this made. It's a calendar of the house with all the pictures inside and pictures of people that, you know, were my relatives. So, and actually, when I was a kid, we used to go there and to my grandmother's house, and I didn't know that it was anything special. I should have compared it to my house, but it was just my grandmother's house. And they used to stick me upstairs on the 2nd floor, and then they'd all go downstairs. And I felt like I was miles away from my mother, you know, help, you know, I couldn't reach her if I wanted. So let's see. After the businesses became successful, that's when my great-grandfather bought the property in Winthrop. And I'm not quite sure why Winthrop. We've kind of talked about it. I thought maybe it's because of the fishing, because my great-grandfather and my grandfather liked to fish. And this was at the camp. And this is my grandfather and his best friend fishing. And they're funky-looking boats. And so I don't know why they settled in Winthrop. But I've learned that there are a lot of people from Attleboro in Winthrop that I didn't know. So Let's see. So there were, oh, I know what I was going to say. Because of the fish, my great-grandfather caught a really big fish and he mounted it under glass. And it was at camp. Well, it's no longer at camp. Along with 10 oak chairs. They disappeared.
Disappeared.
Yeah.
Somebody broke in.
Yep. Yep. So it's been a while, probably 20 years now, but yeah. So when I go to antique stores, I kind of look around for it. So
if you have a picture of it, if any of us go, we will see it. Right.
So in 1952 was when my dad came to Maine and started working on the farm. And that was when I was born. And they bought a house in Winthrop and they stayed until they passed away. And they also took over taking care of the farm when Natalie's grandfather retired. Trying to figure out these time frames.
Yes, it's kind of hard to get general years, and that's about it.
So they raised racehorses and they were pacers. I don't know if you know what pacers are, but their legs go this way. But most people think they're trotters, and I think they kind of go like this. But they were pacers and something a little different. And this was Simon Kenton, who was one who did really well racing. And this is another picture of him.
Very famous.
Yes. And so there are the Guernsey cows, and that is my grandfather milking it. I bet he never milked a cow in his life. Yes. Well, I think a lot of them are posed. Well, like all these people out in the front porch. And that one is my grandfather laying in the grass and great grandfather pushing a wheelbarrow. And that is behind the farm. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think he was doing anything but posing.
With a bow tie and a long white shirt.
There's a notebook with a bunch of men playing cards outside at camp in the woods. And they all have white shirts and ties on. And my grandfather is sitting on the back of a chair, like up here, wobbling, like you yell at your kids, don't do that. So, and they, Natalie's grandfather used to milk the cows and sold it to a farm, Drew's Dairy. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that. She told me this. And so I looked it up on Google, of course, we Google everything. Mm-hmm. And I was able to find a picture of a milk bottle from Drew's Dairy Farm, but I tried to save it and I don't know where it went. But it was kind of interesting. And the story with the milk bottle was it came from someone out west. They were cleaning out somebody's estate and they saw that it was from Maine. And so I guess they sent it to somebody in Maine, but kind of interesting. So the horses are gone. The cows are gone. When I was growing up, I heard all the stories about the horses and the ponies, and they weren't there. And I was sad because I wanted to ride horses and ponies. And my father had a farm and I couldn't have one. So anyway, my grandmother and grandfather had a housekeeper at their house in Attleboro. And the housekeeper and her daughter lived with my grandparents. And so when they would, Lorraine, we're all tied together. And Lorraine's on Zoom.
Oh, we're doing Zoom.
She's Zooming from her room. And so I think
she's 92.
Yes, 92. And so they would come up every summer with my grandparents and they would ride in, I don't know what kind of a car, but it had a rumble seat. And she would tell stories about riding in the rumble seat with my father with a rabbit and a chicken between them because they were bringing them up to camp for the summer. And so Lorraine is 92 and lives on Cape Cod. And so she's told me lots of stories that I'm going to share some of them with you. She also talked about when they were coming up, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but she and my grandfather, they would stop. She thought it was in gray, but I don't know how that could be. But anyway, they would stop and they'd get out of the car and they could see the barn roof from the Tappan Farm. And it said Tappan Stock Farm on the roof. So I don't know where they were, really. Gray seems a little too far.
Green.
Maybe, but you also have to remember there weren't as many trees because a lot of places, the hills didn't have any trees. So I don't know, but she thought it was exciting because she was getting to camp. And so one of the things is I learned a lot about Natalie through her because she would go up to the farm and hang out with Natalie's aunts.
Yeah. 4 girls to play with at the farm for the summer.
So, so that was that. And then she would come up to Natalie's parents' house in the winter, like the last week of Christmas vacation. And they would keep her for that week. And they would take her to camp so she could ski. I don't know how she did that, but
snowshoe or something.
Right. And then they would, go and pick her up and must have fed her.
Oh,
and,
sure.
Yeah. And so
we live very near the train on High Street.
Yeah.
So the train came
when it was time for her to go back, Natalie's father, Maynard, would drive down and park his car on the train tracks. She's never heard this story.
This is hearsay. But it sounds like something he would do.
So he would park there until the train came so she could get on the train. Does it sound like something?
Yeah. She loved it.
Yes. Also, according to Lorraine, my grandmother had a rule at camp. If you caught it, you ate it. So supposedly my father and his brother caught a giant snapping turtle. And so my grandmother cooked it and they ate it.
Like chicken.
Well, I don't know. And they took a roast up. Right. They took a giant roast up to her grandparents' house so they could have it. I'm not sure they were excited, but
turtle soup.
So also, I didn't talk. They raised apples, and there was an article that I had never seen about. They had like 1,800 trees or something
they added to their orchard.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
and so
big orchard.
So they would send Lorraine a box of apples every year when she was in college. So, so that's all I really have to say. In this book, I can go back 14 generations. And something really exciting. One of the guys that I'm related to came to England. He wasn't related to William the Conqueror, but he came with William the Conqueror, supposedly. So Natalie's going to tell about her stories that she's heard. Oh, one more. My great-grandparents built a speedway in Attleboro where they took the horses and raced them.
Oh, wow.
And it had grandstands, and stuff. And it was still there when I was a kid. I think it's just a road now, but it's right in town. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, Natalie.
Okay. Just a point of interest. Attleboro is south of Boston, and it's right near Providence. I had to look it up to be honest with you, so we kind of knew what it was. So I'm so thrilled that so many people are here tonight. I didn't think we would be that interesting, to tell you the honest truth. But anyway, what Kathy had was fact. She's looked all this up. She knows all the history of the Tappans, where mine is just hearsay and stories being handed down through the years. My mother, my parents were older parents. My mother had me at 44. And anyway, that's beside the point. Okay. Kathy's presentation, I'm going to read a little bit first. Kathy's presentation was showing you the widespread acreage of the Tappan farm, and you can understand the progression of the farm with all its varied developments. the registered cows for milk to Drew's Dairy, the immense apple orchard, and the racehorses. So there was a lot going on at that farm. So when my grandfather was a young man in Attleboro, he worked for the Tappans in their jewelry factory. And he was sort of a handyman, and I heard he also did plumbing and stuff. And they must have liked him because they asked him if he would like to go to Winthrop, Maine, and manage their farm. Now, their farm, as you can see up here on the board, that's 250-acre farm. That's pretty good size for a young man coming from Attleboro.
City,
yeah. My grandfather was Ray Riley, and he worked for the Tappans in Attleboro, Mass. And he was asked if he would like to manage the work. It was a working farm. And my grandfather was young, had a wife with 2 children, and he must have realized that this was an opportunity that wouldn't come around again. And so he accepted the offer around 1910 or 12, I'm guessing. My mother was born in 05. Her sister was born in 7. So the 2 of them came up. And that's where it all began. And Ray and Bertha Riley, or Bertie, as Grandpa called her, raised 4 girls. They were known as the Riley girls. My mother, Madeline. No, maybe, I don't know. My mother, Madeline, was the oldest. And I have pictures. This is them right here. My mother, Madeline, was the oldest, and then her sister, Irma, 2 years younger. And next in line was Natalie. She's on the bottom here. And then the last one was Eleanor. And you might know my Aunt Eleanor Beeson. She lived her whole life here in Winthrop. And another little fact, my Aunt Nat right here was married to Richard Lidstone, who was from Winthrop. At one time, she was married to him. Yeah, a little gossip. All of the stories that I've heard about growing up on the farm came from my mother and my 3 aunts. And I have no idea how truthful they are, but they were repeated many times, so maybe they were. My grandmother died in 1951. So I was only a year old. I really did not get to go to the farm. My Aunt Eleanor had 3 children. They were of the age that they could go to the farm and have those kind of memories. Let's see. After my grandmother died in 1951, my grandfather lived till 1957. So he was there alone for a little while. And no, that's not true. When Grandma died in 51, Eleanor did not want Grandpa living at the farm by himself. That was it. So she brought him over to Winthrop to live with her, but he died in 1957. So he didn't live with her too long. But when they first came.
But I think that's when my dad and uncle took over when he left. Right.
We're trying to piece these things together, you know. And at that time, Eleanor had the house that used to be Mia Lena's at the top of the hill up here. That's where Grandpa went. And then they went over to Central Street. And he was involved in town things, my grandpa. And he was on the school board and was a selectman. And the one in particular story that I remember, I was coming home from school. It must have been first grade. And I was walking down Main Street. I know exactly where it was. It was between LaValley's and Wilson's. And there was my grandfather. He had this big leather pouch. And he was emptying all the pennies from the parking meters into that pouch. I was so proud that that was my grandfather doing that, you know, and I've never forgot it. I can see that leather pouch to this day, dumping the pennies. So, and my cousins got over to the farm, but I really didn't. The very oldest cousin who was born at the farm, I'm going to point with my paper, was Irma, the top gal. She got married first, and she had a daughter, Diane, and Diane was, I would say she was probably 15 or so when Eleanor's firstborn, Raymond, this one, Raymond's in all the pictures with the pony. He was over there all the time. So then I don't know if next in line Linda went much or not, but
see, they got to hang out with the ponies and I didn't.
This just came to me. I remember when Grandpa lived on Central Street, Stephen, the youngest cousin, it was Bison, yes. He and I would run for Grandpa's truck, which was they parked it on the lawn, because Grandpa was taking us for an ice cream. It was 5 cents down on 202 before Knowles Lumber was a little ice cream place, and they had a little round scoop, and it was 5 cents. But Stephen and I would run to get into the pickup before the dog, because the dog wanted to go too, and she wanted to get in first, old Reddy. So that just came to me. That little Grandpa took Stephen and I for a little ice cream. So probably the dog too. I can remember him smoking a cigar.
My grandfather did too.
Yeah, that was the thing they did then. Now, if you come up and look at these pictures, a lot of the Shetland, I say a lot, there were 3 Shetland ponies, Queenie, Fairy, and Goldie. And this is Fairy. And she just walked around like a dog. She wasn't tied up or anything. Wherever the kids were, she was. She thought she was a dog, I guess. And most of the pictures has my cousin Raymond in it. There's Grandma with Raymond on the back. But she just loved being around with the kids. Here's the 3 Shetland ponies right there. And then here's the opening to the barn. And again, the pony. And this dog was Patty. She was a collie. She was with them all the time too. And let's see. Kathy had talked about the horses.
Oh yeah, I didn't mention
the
that.
Japon was a Percheron. They had Percherons, and they were
Workhorses.
beautiful big workhorses, but they were immaculate. And Simon Kenton was a very famous racehorse.
Right.
And I think Grandpa helped train him with the sulkies. And then there were other horses too. And one of the stories is Simon Kenton was very high strung. And my Aunt Nat was the tomboy of the family, this one right here. And she had to be with Grandpa all the time. And so she was out in the barn upstairs. And in those days, they had an opening in the floor that you would put the hay down for the whatever critter was under, either a horse or a cow. And so she was playing up there, and she fell through down into Simon Kenton's stall. And he was very high strung. He could have killed her in a second. And his eyes, this is the story I heard, his eyes got very big, and he started shaking all over and not moving. And I guess my grandfather grabbed her and got her out of there. So
Wow.
That was just one thing. I'm sure she was punished. I don't know, but she didn't mean to fall down. But anyway, she was quite the tomboy. My granddad had a brand new riding gloves. And when she put them on, they were too big. So she cut the fingers off. And so I don't think that went over very good either. And she dammed up a little stream that had to be broken open. And she was quite the little devil. She really was. They're all very special to me. Let me see. I talked to you about the Shetland ponies. Let's see. That's one. Let's see. Irma up here. She was the first to get off the farm. She's what I would call kind of glitz and glamour. You know, she was a farm girl, but she just as soon be out partying. Where my mother was the very quiet one, a reader, always had her nose in a book. and a teacher. She became a teacher with my Aunt Nat. And Eleanor almost became a nurse, not quite. She decided to get married instead. But my mother's nickname was Beebe. Her sister said to her, "Oh, Madeline, you're just an old biddy." She was 30-ish, you know, and she didn't care. And so when Raymond came along, he couldn't say biddy. He could say Beebe. So for the rest of her life, everybody called her Aunt Beebe or Aunt Beebe. So that's how that little name got going. And let's see here. Growing up on the farm, there were a fair amount of chores to do. And my grandmother was always cooking for people because they did have to have hired help. It's a big farm. Even though they had, I think up the Pisgah Road, they had some small cabins for the thank you. And so she was always cooking, and of course everybody sent their kid to Maine for the summer, not thinking of she already had enough work cooking for the hired people, but the kids came. Of course they loved it. And there were no electric milking machines, and my Uncle Russell, who I call him Uncle Russell. He was really my mother's cousin, and I named my son after him. I just loved him. So anyway, my Uncle Russell remembers grandmother always had cookies or donuts in a big crock. And he said you would go in the house in one door, make a big circle, grab a cookie and go back out again. He knew there was always something in that crock. But you know, being on a farm isn't easy. But they made it work. You see them picnicking out on the lawn. One of these, I think it's this one right here, they made root beer. So everybody's sitting on the front step having root beer. In the winter, here's somebody on snowshoes. They had fun. They made their own fun. And it was a beautiful, beautiful farm. Really a lovely farm. And there's another one. I was talking with someone. There's a picture up here that I couldn't quite decide. This one, if it's a toy or if it's a real wagon. It looks too small for a Shetland pony, but someone had said to me maybe it was a goat or something hooked up to it. I don't know, but this is my Aunt Nat. She was the horse. She always was the horse right there. And of course, there's the dog, Patty. She was with the kids. So let's see. And I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, I just made a point that those, I don't know, what are those things called that go beside a horse when you hook them up? Sheaves? Shavs. They look too low to the ground to be able to hook up to something. But
maybe
anyway.
a goat.
Yeah, I think it's goat size.
Oh, yeah, maybe a dog.
Yeah, if there was a big dog. But I don't think Patty could do it.
No.
Across the pond from the Tappan camp, there became a piece of property for sale. Small piece, not big. My mother wanted to buy it. She wasn't married. She lived on the farm. She was a teacher. It was $100. She had to borrow some of that from her sister because she was a teacher and she really didn't make too much money. And I'm sure she gave her parents some money for living at the farm. So they would take a tent, take Patty, paddle across the lake, and camp out over on her piece of property. It's right across from the Tappan farm. So, and I couldn't find a picture of that one, but anyway, and I'm guessing that was in the 30s.
There's a picture right there with your.
Oh, this is my mother right here. And what I couldn't figure out, she's sitting on a lot of lumber, but I think they built like a platform to put I'm just making this up, to put their tent on. And I don't know if there was a road down from Hardscrabble or not. It's Mr. Ward on the Hardscrabble Road sold her the property. So I'm not sure it's not after she got married. My father was in the lumber business. And so when she married him, they put up a one room, he always called it a shack, but a one room camp over there. But I don't know what that wood is from. I don't know if it came over by water or it looks it because it's right down at the beach. So maybe, I don't know, have to make up a story about that one. So that was I'm guessing about the late 1930s. And years later, when the Riley girls had their own homes, granddad and grandmother would come over town and visit. And for my grandmother, this was a big deal. She put on her nice dress. She was coming to town. You know, she's getting off the farm and she'd visit. And of course, Grandpa knew that they'd come to my mother's and to Eleanor's. We always lived close. He knew when he came to our house, he could get his little shot of whiskey, but not at Eleanor's. So he always made that stop. And Grandma loved to come. She just loved to come over to town and see her kids and grandchildren. And then Grandpa would say, okay, we got to go milk the cows. And she'd say, oh, Ray, can't we stay just a little bit longer? Oh, no, got to go milk the cows. So off they'd go. She'd just beg to stay a little bit longer, but away they went. And actually, my grandmother ended up being in several clubs around town, literary club, and I don't know what else, but so that was good. Got her out. And I'm going to close with one story that it's a true story. When my Aunt Nat lived in Florida in her later years, let's see, I was married, so it probably was in the 80s. I went down to see her and she had some dementia. And she basically knew who I was. I had cut her hair the night before. And I said to her the next day, oh, your hair looks so nice today, Nat. And she said, yeah, that lady cut it for me. And I said, oh, that was me. Oh, that's right, too. That's right, too. And then she said to me, Nat, is all the tack still up on the wall in the horse barn? And I said, gee, Nat, I don't know. I don't go over, but I'm sure it is. She said, oh, good. So all the way, this memory has stayed with her until her life was over. The farm was in her.
Yeah.
And she lived it. And that's the end of my story.
Tell them about that little picture on the end in the papoose.
Oh, that's Kathy's uncle, Charles.
Yes. Yeah.
Look at when you come up and look, it's a basket, a woven basket.
It looks like a papoose.
Yeah, but it's not any car seat we'd have now, that's for sure. But please come up and look at anything that you'd like to look at. If you have any questions.
Any questions?
We would love to answer them for you. Or we'll make up something if we don't know the answer. Hi. Yeah.
Everett or Bessie Bowler told me at one time there was an old stagecoach, Concord stagecoach in a barn. Do you remember it at all?
No, I'm sorry.
No. Could have been. Could have gone somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes, Bobby Bowler is my name.
I remember.
I grew up on the corner of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
For 8 years and then we moved to Monmouth. But my mother told me that at Christmas time, my grandmother would go down and get all the wrapping paper from Mrs. Riley, and she'd take it home and she'd iron it for the use the next year.
Yeah. Wow.
She had to. Yeah, but what a nice memory. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
And then my father told me in 1952 he was working in the barn, and that's when the tornado hit Memorial Drive.
Oh.
And the barn started shaking, and he started running up the stairs, and as he's running up the stairs, the rats are running right by him.
Wow. Yes. Natalie?
Your mother was my Girl Scout leader.
Oh, Then you're probably in this picture. I brought this picture because this is in our house up High Street.
Yes.
And I would love to know whoever else is in this picture. Thank you.
And your Aunt Eleanor, you said she wanted to become a nurse.
Yeah, she came this close.
Well, she worked for Dr. Wales.
Wales, okay.
Dr. Wales had an office here in Winthrop.
On the corner.
I was born at home.
Oh.
And Eleanor was the attendant when I was born.
Oh, really? Oh.
And she, forever, every time I saw her, I was there when you were born.
Yes.
And I was like 20 something.
Yeah. Well, see? Well, that's nice. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Cool.
Very nice.
So, sorry.
I remember Mama. We used to call her Mama.
Yep.
And she seemed like royalty to me.
Aww.
And I'd always get down and visit her when she was there for the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad would take me down, and she showed me all these postcards of places that she'd been and everything.
Nice.
She's just a wonderful woman. And point I was going to make. Shoot.
Take your time.
Every Christmas, she always sent us this nice box of beautiful fruit from Florida.
Oh,
Yep,
that's
us
nice.
too.
That's nice. Plastic grass and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
I just thought that was the best thing.
That was
Mhm.
special.
It was very
Special.
good.
Arthur, did you have a
When
question?
did you say his name was Simon Kent?
Kenton.
Kenton.
When did he run?
1906 or 8. Says on this thing.
That was on eBay. I've never bought anything on eBay in my life.
Oh, this thing up
And
here.
I saw the Simon Kenton name and I said, I'm going to buy it. How do I do it? It was $11.99, you know, and it didn't come. It'll probably be in tomorrow's mail.
Right.
But it lists 3 racehorses and he's the top one. He was very famous, very famous. So anybody else have anything they'd like to add or ask? Yeah. So
Where was the milk, Drew's milk?
I don't know.
Where were they out of?
I think it was out of Augusta.
That's what I was thinking, but
They were.
They were out here.
yeah.
See, everybody knows a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
So the milkman would bring that around.
Yeah.
Well,
Delivered to the house.
Yeah.
so the farm
Remember?
must have sent it over to them somehow.
They must have did they pasteurize and
I
stuff
don't know.
back then? They must have. They don't sell raw milk, I guess. I don't know. Let's make that up. I have other pictures here on the table that I see family in it, but I don't know what they are. I have no idea. So I think
She brought them, so she's hoping someone will tell her who they are.
of my grandfather with the
Look at that one. It's
The Girl Scout one?
yeah, this is with it says International Lions, my grandfather and 3 other gentlemen. It has to be, I don't know. I just brought them. And this is my mother when she was probably about 18 or so. But I brought these pictures because I think they're so funny with the great big bows in their hair. It's bigger than their head, the bows.
So those were your aunts?
This is my grandmother and my mother and her 3 sisters.
Wow.
They were so cute. Oh, yeah, that one has bows too.
So I do have a notebook that has more pictures that if you'd like to look at, you can do that before you leave. And I also have the calendar if you'd like to look at that with the pictures from the Tappan house. So I guess that's the end of our presentation. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.